Your favorite band's about to play a sold-out show. You got in.
Over here!
With a friend. And found a spot close enough to see the set list. They're definitely playing your song. When you're with Amex, it's not if it's going to happen, but when. American Express. Don't live life without it.
At Jiffy Lube, it's our job to keep you moving. With a full range of services from oil changes and tire rotations to filters, wipers, and more, we've got what your car needs right when you need it. So you're ready for whatever's next. Putting you in the driver's seat of car care? That's a job for Jiffy.
Welcome to the Behind the Bits podcast. Your host, Scott Curtis, wants to learn everything he can about stand-up comedy and take you along for the ride. Scott and his guests talk serious about comedy in every episode. Behind the Bits will uncover knowledge from different perspectives on subjects such as writing and performing stand-up comedy, as well as booking shows and the comedy life. If you're thinking about becoming a stand-up comic, already in the comic game, or a comedy nerd, Behind the Bits is the show for you. Now, let's get Behind the Bits.
Hey, BTB buddies. Today I've got Drew Harmon from Detroit, Michigan on the show. And boy, did we live up to Behind the Bits tagline of serious comedy talk. From front to back, we had serious comedy talk that any new comedian could listen to and learn something. So give it a listen. The first few minutes are a little crunchy. There were some audio problems, but it gets better after that. So hang out for like 4 minutes and then everything will be great. Thanks for listening. Here is Drew Harmon. Hey, Drew.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Of course. I also appreciate that my Willie Nelson poster with the signed ticket is in the background.
Yeah. There you go. So, first thing I wanted to ask is what made you make the move from San Francisco to Detroit?
Yeah. So I was in San Francisco for about 14 years. I actually started comedy in Grand Rapids, Michigan, moved out to San Francisco for work. I'd been doing stand-up. I've been working, because it's Midwest. Sometimes if you can competently hold a microphone and not piss in your pants for 10 minutes, then you can be a host at a club.
Yeah.
And it's not so much the case now. I think it's a little more, they're a little more strident now, but at the time that was the case. So I was already hosting at clubs in the Midwest. Moved out to California for work, but I immediately jumped into the scene there and had that moment where you're like in a club, you're seeing some of the local comics. And of course I went out there thinking like, it'll take me 6 to 8 weeks and I'll be working all these clubs. And then I had that moment where I took my notebook and threw it away and just started from scratch. But I'd been in San Francisco for about 14 years. Had done the West Coast scene, LA regularly, Portland and Seattle consistently, lots of road work, lots of those triple runs through the Southwest and into Nevada and that kind of good stuff. And my wife and I, our families are all still in Michigan. We both still have day jobs. I've had periods where I am just a comic, but I had a day job for a few years now. And it just kind of hit a point where we were already thinking about leaving. San Francisco is a tough city to live in. We couldn't upgrade our apartment. We were kind of in a small space. Pandemic hit, and we've been saving up money. And of course, the money we had saved up couldn't get us a whole lot in San Francisco, but it could get us a lot in the Detroit area where we have a lot of family.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the bottom line. And on top of that, both of our companies in California gave us the ability to work remote permanently. So we got to keep our California salaries in Detroit. And I got to tell you, balling hard in Detroit versus what it was like in San Francisco. So that was kind of the impetus. All of our parents are alive. We're getting old. We have a lot of nieces and nephews here that we didn't get to see a lot. And I was just ready for a change. I'm in my early 40s, been doing stand-up for about 15 years, had some brushes with opportunities like auditions for Comedy Central and that kind of thing. And just stuff had not hit. And I found myself getting to a point of like, I think I'm ready for a little more space. And let's go see what the scene is like in Detroit. So that's kind of what pushed me into that change.
That's cool. And I find I used to live in northern Indiana in the South Bend area, and got to meet a lot of Michigan comics, and there's just for it being Michigan, okay, Midwest, almost to Canada, all that kind of stuff. There is just a lot of really good comedians that come out of Michigan. I'll say that.
Yeah, and the stage time's been good. There's within the immediate Detroit area, there's really 3 decent clubs, almost 4. We've got a 4th one opening here soon. There's a lot of fairly local shows, like a lot of places. COVID kind of took out some local venues, some spots that had been doing consistent shows. So the scene's adapting a little bit. And anytime you move from one scene, I was very comfortable in San Francisco. I was used to getting up 7 to 10 times a week if I was in town. And I was at that point where you can walk into an open mic or a book showcase and get stage time pretty easily. And while folks here have been super nice and easy, and everyone's been very kind, I was still an unproven entity. So it's taking a little while to break into some spots. I'm in at all but one of the clubs here so far, but that's great. And you know what? It's also not so bad to kind of go through that process. Auditioning, tightening up your set, you're back to like 5-minute sets. I found that some of my material got a little flabby. I was spoiled in being able to be, I'm going to do 10 sets this week. So I'm just going to like jot down a half thought out premise and then I'll just go up a bunch. Whereas now that's not the case for me. I need to be more thoughtful and take the writing a little more seriously, which has been great, which led to being a little more purpose driven when it comes to what's in my 5-minute set. I know that kind of thing, which has been good. It's a good exercise that I think most comics need to go through on a consistent basis, probably.
I do want to get to your working on your sets, and the reason I contacted you is because you got into the Asheville Comedy Festival, and some people had asked you about, how do you do that? And most comics know that you have to have a pretty good 5-minute set to send in there. And as I told you, I got to watch that 5-minute set a few times today, and it's really, really good. I mean, the amount of laughs are perfect. The pacing's perfect. I identified with a lot of the jokes, especially the Jefferson Starship joke. Because I'm old and I remember when it was Jefferson Airplane. So I really enjoyed that set. But in your post that I read, I read into it that you had to do a lot of work to get that set exactly how you wanted it. Can you go into, what it took to get that the way you wanted it?
Yeah, for sure. As a comic, and like I said, I'd gotten used to longer sets, and I typically on the road and at clubs, I'm doing feature sets. So you have more space to kind of putz around. But I decided to put some energy specifically towards let's get a really tight 5-minute set together. And so, really, it kind of came down to I want to have a beginning, middle, and end. I want to start out strong. I want to give a fairly good assessment of the variety of stuff that I'm able to talk about. I don't want to have it be just one topic the whole time, or just kind of bash into the same topic over and over again and kind of repeat the same themes. I want there to be some variation there. So there's a little something for everybody, while it still combines, my general view on everything. So it kind of came down to, for me, my writing process has always been start with the basic concept and then flesh it out, like set up punchline, and then see if that hits. If that hits, and you start to expand on that and look for the other ideas to add in there. But what always happens for me is it expands and expands and expands, and a bit goes from 45 seconds to 3 or 4 minutes. Yeah. And then that's the real hard part is, okay, now can we edit it down so I can fit this so it's a minute 45, minute 30 maximum. And with that set, it kind of came down to I struggled including there's a part about Spirit Airlines, and I struggle even doing an airline joke because it's old school. It's like straight out of the 80s, like sports coat with the sleeves rolled up. However, I really enjoy my take on it, and audiences continue to have it hit. But I'll tell you, the editing process, the initial line I wrote that began the Spirit Airlines joke, that when I first did the joke was kind of the whole impetus for the writing it. That's the bit that ended up getting cut out. That's the part that I don't do anymore. Is I would I recorded it as part of the set a few times, and when I was watching and reviewing the set, I realized that's the part that hits the least. That's the least. That's the smallest laugh of the whole joke, and it doesn't drive the joke anywhere else. And I decided it was my favorite line, but I pulled it out, and then all of a sudden it hits harder and it smooths easier. It kind of goes easier into the next bit. And I think that's where I struggle, and a lot of comics struggle overall. How do you you got to kill your darlings sometimes, and look for specifically the laughs per minute. That was one of the things that I was looking at when I was trying to get to a 5-minute tape. Is there a solid laugh, say every 15 to 20 seconds? Is there some energy propelling it forward? Because I've had sets that I've recorded in the past and stuff that I've done in the past where clearly it's you have those gaps where it's like 30 or 40 seconds of setup, and if you're expecting a booker or a festival person who's reviewing tapes to sit through that stuff, I know for a fact they're gonna tune out, and rightfully so. And if it comes down to, unless it's genius, unless it is 100% pure genius, they are gonna eventually tune out or drop off. And if it comes down to you and someone else who has 15, 20 seconds between laughs, they're gonna go with the person who's getting more laughs. That's just how comedy works. Right. Again, unless you're a genius. I don't want to. I'm sure there's folks who are like, "Who the hell is this guy?" And you're correct. You're not wrong. I'm a dude who's got I've had a few things here and there. I've been around, but I'm a solid middle dude. I am a solid middle, but I at no point. My biggest brush with fame has been when a weekly in San Francisco. I had a show that was doing fairly well. It was in a local festival, but they put it in the weekly as my show's title with Dan Harmon, and the show sold out super fast. And they had to do an article about how, well, actually it's not Dan Harmon, it's Drew Harmon. And so, yeah, that's kind of where that's been my biggest brush with fame. But on the other hand, I have managed to squeak my way into stuff, and I've managed to be around, and I've managed to get attention from bookers and other festivals. And I've got a better track record than most, let's say. So I've kind of seen the process, watched other comics go through what works and what doesn't. And this is just what's worked for me. Is you just have to. I think as comics, we try to find the secret ingredient. One of the reasons for the post was comics were congratulating me on getting in, and that's great. That's super nice. But then I had a handful of comics who started asking, "What did you use to record it? What was the secret of? Did you use a 4K camera? Or are you using a secondary audio source?" They're going into the production value of the piece versus the writing process. And I know for a fact that most show producers, most bookers, they would love to have a crystal clear image quality. They'd love to have it be pristine audio, but they don't necessarily need it to be. And so I was a little shocked at how, and I'm one of those comics. I use a 4K camera, although I think the clip in question was recorded on my phone, if I recall correctly. Okay. And I got the audio on my Apple Watch, and that worked just fine.
Oh,
it really
that's cool. Yeah.
And so it came down to the post came from a desire to give some other comics insight into it's like, do the best you can when it comes to production, but the real work, like the stuff that's actually the secret sauce, is all in the write, review, rewrite, review it again, rewrite it again, over and over and over again. That's where it comes in, and that's where you start to break through into the good stuff. And yeah, that 5 minutes, just when it starts to hit and you realize, like, I have 5 super tight minutes, it's also inspired me to go back to my other stuff, like my feature set. And I realized, like, a lot of this is a little flabby and indulgent. Let's start to tighten that up as well. It's been a great exercise for me and just the writing process.
And really, you can, and folks, don't mind the thunderstorm I got going on if you can hear it. I've got hail like the size of quarters coming down right now. But yeah, and I know myself, watching my own stuff and analyzing myself, you're one of two people. You either look at it and say, hey, this is all comedy gold, I love it, and that means your ego needs to be looked at, or you look at it like me and this is all shit and I don't ever want to see it again and I don't ever want to say it again. But then you have to look at it again and say, hey, this worked pretty good, but it could be better. And it's the hard, for me, it's the hardest part about doing stand-up is actually evaluating what your sets are and getting the words right, and like you said, cutting out your babies there, the ones the stuff that you love that you think is super good, and yeah, it's just not quite hitting as well as it could.
Yeah. And, video is, I record audio of pretty much every set. And that's one of the reasons I got an Apple Watch is because you can easily do a voice memo there. And that comes in handy quite a bit of times if I'm syncing video later or something like that. But it's like the most crucial skill that I think a lot of comics forget about is just literally being able to watch yourself and judge yourself critically, but fairly. When I first started recording video a lot, I thought I was, before I recorded the video, I thought I was super smooth and cool. And I was like, I was statuesque and I looked like a, rugged version of the Marlboro Man on stage. When I watched those sets, I realized, oh, I'm a Muppet going crazy with my arms flailing everywhere. And I realized how frantic I was. And it wasn't necessarily that the material was bad. It was just I was performing it in such a frantic way that I would sometimes come off stage wondering, like, am I that out of shape? I'm sweating so much. And then I watch the video. I'm like, oh, it's because I'm a tense ball of anxiety the entire time. I need to calm down. So that was huge for me. But just being able to like watch it critically. And, there's comics on the other side of it. I knew one comic once who we were both doing a showcase at a club. And he recorded his set on a video camera, and he went up early. And so as soon as the show was done, he takes down his gear and he leaves and goes out to the car. And we didn't see him for 15, 20 minutes. He comes back in later, and he just says, and we're sitting in the back in the kind of comic area. He just says, I killed. I'm like, yeah, you did pretty well. He says, no, I killed. I just watched my video twice. Like he went to the car and immediately watched it. And that's also a level of narcissism that there's plenty of comics who do that where it's just, they can't honestly critique themselves or listen to the reaction honestly. And I've seen that over and over and over again. I'm guilty of it as well. It feels, if you don't watch the set, it feels different on stage than it does. If you get a few laughs on while you're on stage in certain kinds of room, it feels like you're crushing. But then you watch the video and you're like, oh no, I got that table, but the rest of the room is not on board with any of that. And it's just such a critical skill, but it's also like fairly and honestly critiquing your material. And I think that's what takes most comics. It was what holds most comics back, but also what pushes them forward into that next realm is just being able to have the taste level to decide like this is not genius. My first draft was not genius. I have work to do. And that's what everyone I've known who's like pushed ahead into those higher levels works on material and every aspect of their performance with such intensity that that's one of those things that whenever I get soft and flabby, I think of my friends who have done late night spots and gone through that editing process with the producers. And I watched one of my friends, I think he recorded the same set 200 times, making minor changes every single time to get on James Corden. And to see that level of work for a 5-minute spot is just wild. But he went on and he killed, and it led to other things as it should. Yeah.
And a lot of people make the mistake, and I made this mistake, was, I did get a decent 5 minutes put together, and it was, I would say it's okay. And it was enough that I felt like I deserved to be up there, but then I felt I had to expand it. and I had to get more minutes and more minutes and get up to 15 and get up to 20, where the 5 minutes that I originally did should have been honed better before I went on. I mean, it's okay to write that stuff, but you really got to get it to the point where you know it's just, this is as good as it's going to get, at least right now. And I see a lot of people make that mistake, and then other folks make the other mistake where they just keep hanging on to that 5 minutes and they don't add to it, or they hang on to stuff that just doesn't work. And I look at self-awareness, and some of it's a maturity thing, and I think some of it's a maturity and comedy thing, because you can be pretty self-aware in your normal life, and be mature and act like an adult, but then all of a sudden when you go on stage, you just become this complete idiot that doesn't know what's going on, and you step off and you think you killed, and guess what, you weren't even close.
Yeah. And there's a tendency, it's always been there, especially in open micers and people who are just starting to maybe get booked a little bit. And it's very prevalent these days where if the comic writes a bit and it doesn't really hit that hard, the tendency is to, for some reason, then determine that that's they're not ready for my genius. They can't handle it. I guess it blew your mind.
Yeah.
Something like that. As opposed to, pushing ahead and trying to come up with the way that it hits bigger in the room. And I don't understand that inability to, I like to do well. That's always been a thing for me, is I would prefer to do as well as possible in every room. And one of the advantages of moving from San Francisco to Detroit, and also now I'm doing shows in more rural areas. There's a booking agency that's doing like one-nighters around the state, and they are not. It's restaurants and bars in pretty rural areas. And so, as a comic, that challenge to me is, can I make a joke work in San Francisco, but also Detroit? I don't want to be the guy who has like the two different sets of like, okay, if I'm here, I do this joke, but if I'm here, I do that joke. Because also that tends to lean into I'm gonna cater to each of those specific audiences. I want to be me with my material in whatever room I'm in, wherever that may be. And having already done some road work and travel a little bit prior to the move, I felt like I was primed for that anyway. But it's been a great exercise, and so far, there's been a couple of rooms where I just do not go over, but I think that's every comic. But you just focus on the writing and trying to find that angle that works for everybody. And that's, and eventually you find, you figure out the math problem and get there.
Yeah. How do you feel about the whole festival thing? I get these, I get so much, conflicting opinions on comedy festivals and stuff like that. You got to pay to send your video in, and it's just a way to fill in spots for the headliners you got coming in. But on the other hand, I see people, they say, well, there's industry people at every single one of these, and you should definitely get into as many as you can. What's your feeling on that?
Yeah. And that's a great question, especially for newer comics, because there are festivals that are not going to benefit you as a comic, but early on, it really comes down to stage time and being able to practice in certain areas. So bottom line, what I have found with festivals is I've done them, and then I've gone back and forth on whether it's good or not. For me personally, it comes down to do the festivals that either have a good reputation or are in a place where you would like to perform. But I would urge everyone to look for the ones with a better reputation, but understand going into it, this is not going to be your big break. You're not going to have Mr. Hollywood show up with a cigar, chomping and coming in and like, you got something special, kid. I'm getting you on my private jet and flying you out right now. That's not going to happen. I have had that expectation. I have had moments where it's like, oh, so-and-so is here. Or somebody from such and such is here. And it never led to anything. However, I can see points in my comedy career where going to certain festivals or performing in certain places led to suddenly I found myself having more road work or like that credit, or suddenly I know comics in other areas doing stuff like Asheville, some of the other the comedy competitions in San Francisco and Seattle have been good for you. Meet comics from all over the country. And really what you end up doing is you start to, as you're kind of building up your portfolio of the comics that you know across the country. And the nice thing now is that wherever I'm going, if my wife and I decide we're going to go visit family somewhere or we're going to take a trip, we can I can find stage time for a night or two in any spot. Or I might have an in at a club in an area where I'd like to go do a week or something. So you start to build those connections, and also just traveling to other places. It's good to put some miles on your jokes. Just getting, I know a lot of comics who have either never been on an airplane for comedy, or they've barely driven across state lines to do stand up. And you can kind of tell, and especially if a comic is based in a very specific area and they stay in that area for a long period of time. And this is true in like Florida, as it is in New Orleans, as it is in San Francisco, as it is in New York and LA. Comics develop that callus for that specific area. They develop that material and they can crush. And I see the same thing happen to comics who only, like, if a comic gets a successful room, if they build a good room and they're doing like 1 or 2 nights a week at that room, and they start to like, well, no, I've got all the comedy I need to do. I'm just going to stay here. And then they venture out, and it's like a house cat suddenly having to catch their own food again. I've seen comics from LA travel to like do a festival in Portland. It's their first time out of LA and they just bomb. I've seen comics from New York go and do like shows in Chicago. And it's that, for whatever reason, that abrasive New York tone that they're just so used to. Like they're used to that, Mad Max, one comic enters, nobody leaves energy. And it just kind of abrasively doesn't go over well. And it can happen anywhere. Even here in Michigan, I see comics from the west side of the state who never travel east, and comics from east who never go over to the west. Yeah. And when they finally do, they bomb, and they're like, well, that side of the state sucks. Like, no, it doesn't. It's just you don't know how to work the 3 rooms that you keep hitting all the time. Right. You gotta mix it up. So festivals, if you can afford it, do it, but don't look at it as this is my big break. This is where I'm gonna have a Netflix special by the end of the year. Once I do that, look at it as an opportunity to meet some other comics, perform on some different stages, but also set your boundaries for what you're expecting to get out of it. I had one festival before COVID that I was accepted into. I accepted the invite. I got the itinerary for the shows, and they put me on 2 shows. They were both in a bar at the town that the festival was happening in, and the bar seats about 50 people. But they had a club and another larger venue where they were doing other shows. And so I reached out to one of the main producers and said, this is not worth the plane ticket and hotel for me to put this expenditure in to come do bar shows. I can do bar shows where I'm at right now. I would like to be on one of those. And they never got back to me. And so a week later, I canceled the booking. And then they responded back and said, well, if we'd known it was such a big deal, we would have put you on one of the other shows. I'm like, I said it was a big deal, but you set those boundaries and what you expect out of it. Don't fly around and blow all your money just to go do bar shows. Make a goal of what you want to get out of it, and stick to that. And if you're not going to get what you need out of it, then don't feel too bad about not showing up or canceling. There's always another comic who is more than happy to take that spot. So
yeah. I you talked about Portland, and from everything I hear, because I don't travel, and I've only been part of 2 local scenes, one in South Bend and one in Huntsville, where I live now, and I do see that. And one of the things that I notice is, people get so wrapped up in the drama of their scene that they forget what their ultimate goal is. And then on the other hand, I see people who don't get into it, and they're just nice to everybody, and they do their stuff, and then they get out and don't start fights or anything like that. And those are the ones that I see moving ahead quicker, and actually getting out and getting some feature work and getting on shows and showcases and stuff like that much quicker than the ones that are just more about the politics and stuff like that. And you never know what their actual goal is. One thing that I learned, being in business as long as I have, is you have to say what your goal is, and you have to be realistic about your goal, and yet make it hard enough that you have to work for it. And in comedy, I think it's exactly the same thing. And if you don't have your eye on the prize, you are really doing yourself a disservice in your act and what you want to do with your life. So, even with the podcast, and when I do go out and do comedy and stuff like that, I do make a little goal for myself. I want to get this many laughs. I want to make this joke better. I want to do this, and I do that rather than think about what are the other people doing.
Yeah, it's, comedy should always be, I've always thought that comedy should be on some level a bit competitive, but don't be a dick about it. Like whenever I do any show, I'm sitting there as a comic I watch the rest of the show as much as possible. And I'm always in my head thinking, I did better than that person, but then they did better than me. Yeah. They closed really strong. And you look at that, but it's not so, it's more about, I don't think it necessarily like I'm trying to beat the other comics. It comes down to competitively, how do I make myself better? And that's always the goal. Like, how do I make that joke better? How do I close stronger? This person, I feel like their jokes weren't as good, but they built a really strong connection with that audience, way stronger than me. And more people are coming up to them after than are coming up to me. I'm just standing here. They're just like, hey, what's up? And then they go and talk to this person that they had a really big connection with. Is it their material? Is it their stage persona? Is it the way they carry themselves? All of that stuff makes a difference. And so you have to think of it that way. And, it's the comedy scene drama and the person who's like very detached from it. I've been both of those people, and being mired in the drama and getting a reputation as being a person who talks behind people's back is never a good thing. Yeah. And also, I feel like it ends up being the kind of situation, I call it playing comic, where a person, they start out doing stand-up, they kind of stick to their area, they most likely get their own bar show or something they book, so then other people will book them back. But they get really into the lifestyle of like, I'm out 4 or 5 nights a week, I'm drinking all the time, I'm out doing shows, I have a really strong opinion about what this local comic did or what this local comic did or how they run their local show. But again, they don't.
Finding the right person for the job isn't easy. Just ask someone who hired a stuntman to do their home renovations.
Just finished a new sunroom, Mrs. C. The best part is I used candy glass for all the windows, so you can do this. And this. Doesn't hurt a bit either.
But if you've got an insurance question, you can always count on your local Geico agent. They can bundle your policies, which could save you hundreds.
And if you don't want to take the long way to the kitchen, the walls are breakaway too. See?
For expert help with all your insurance needs, visit geico.com/local today.
Hurry in to Mattress Firm's July 4th sale. Get a king bed for the price of a queen or a queen for a twin and save up to $500 on Sealy. Plus, get a free adjustable base with qualifying Sealy purchase, up to a $499 value. Or shop Tempur-Pedic, the most highly recommended bed in America, and save $500 on all Tempur-Breeze mattresses. And get a $300 instant gift good towards sleep accessories. Only at Mattress Firm. Restrictions apply. See store or mattressfirm.com for details.
Expand out very much, and they get kind of stuck. It's like their wheels are spinning in the mud in that spot. And they start to kind of be known for like the one thing. I see a lot of comics, and I fell victim to it too, is once I got to a point of having a really strong 10 minutes and I was getting booked consistently and I had that 10, I rested on that 10 for a good 18 to 24 months without developing additional material. And that was my period of playing comic. I was drinking consistently at every show. I'm hanging out before and after. All of my closest friends are comics. Which is a great time. It's one of the most fun times of my life, but it was also one of the least creatively productive. And I feel like for me, I was spinning my wheels as well there, because I wasn't advancing the material. I wasn't taking an honest look at the material and trying to move it forward while also building on the material that I had in my on my bench of stuff to pull in. I had 10. If you wanted me to do 20, then I was going to be struggling to do that 20. And when I finally got to a point of accepting that, that was also around the time when I stopped drinking and got a little more focused, and it became more goal oriented. And I think you're right. A lot of comics don't set goals for what do I want? And that first goal is most likely, I want to work at this local club. Okay, who works there? What do they do? What was their process like? What's the booking process? What's the audition process? How do I start to become a viable candidate? And it's, for a lot of clubs, and a lot of comics don't like to hear this, but for a lot of clubs, it's not necessarily getting their attention and, a quick audition and suddenly you're working there. It's also making sure that you don't give them reasons not to book you. Right. And a lot of comics provide a lot of reasons to they're funny on stage, but I heard they did this at this other show, or I heard they go on stage drunk a lot. Yeah. All of that kind of stuff. It's a lot of clubs. It takes a bit longer to get in there because they're just making sure you're not crazy. Yeah. And so that's the first goal, is how do I respect this as a business and present myself as somebody who is viable, that I'm going to show up. I'm going to be reliable on stage. I'm going to be funny. I'm not going to cause any problems. And I'm not saying necessarily play it super safe with your material. I'm saying be a professional. And the best clubs in the country all are very supportive of all sorts of material, but they also are most likely to book comics that they know are going to respect the club and aren't going in specifically to cause problems with their audience. Right. In the end, we're still selling drinks and chicken fingers. That's kind of what the whole deal is.
And that attitude, there are thousands upon thousands of people that are good enough to be on showcases. They've got a good 10 or 15, or they're really good hosts. They've been hosting, but they haven't been able to make that leap into the feature part. And everything that you're talking about, being nice, being respectful of the club, and having good material, all that kind of stuff has to really play into the fact that people want you to feature, because they know that this is Drew's gonna show up. He's gonna do good. The crowd's not gonna be pissed off when I get on stage, and it's gonna be a good experience for me because my feature's good.
Yeah, it's becoming, when I first started hosting, I remember the moment, because the club everyone wants to get into in the Bay Area is the Punchline in San Francisco. Yeah, that's the club, and it took me forever to get in there. I got my audition, passed it the first time, and my first week I was hosting for Ricky Velez, and I thought, I walked into that club. I'd done other club weeks before, but I thought this is it. I'm here. I belong here. I am so good. It's time. And of course, like a lot of comics, I hit that moment and I thought I will be featuring here within a year or two at most. And that first night on stage at the Punchline, watching the feature, David Bory, he's got a Conan clip. If you don't know David, Bory is Gborie. Okay. David started in San Francisco. He's in LA now. He's done a bunch of stuff, but watching David feature, and David's like 10 years younger than me. He's one of those comics who he went from host to feature for Live Nation in the Bay Area super fast, just because he's so funny. And to watch him do the work, I had another one of those moments where it's like I took my notebook and threw it away. I'm like, I am barely eking out 15 minutes of decent material here. David's crushing for 30 just effortlessly. And it makes I started to pay close attention to that. And I just, I was supposed to get my feature audition there in, I think it was April of 2020. We all know how that went. I went back and passed to feature there in the future. It's like, that was one of my big comedy goals. And when I left San Francisco, I was a little emotional. Like, I haven't done that yet. But they were nice enough to invite me back to do a week and do an audition. And I'm heading back to feature there for Marilyn Reichkop in September. So I'm very excited. Also, Mr. Show was big for me. So this is it's all sorts of stuff coming together.
Wow.
But yeah, it's like the feature spot. It's the easiest spot, I will say. Typically, it's super comfy for any comics who are wondering, is featuring better? It's so much better. The hosting is a lot of work, and a lot of clubs make the host also have to deal with all the logistics of you got to put your name in this bucket, and we're going to do this drawing, and here's all this information about hotels and snacks and all that stuff. The Punchline and Live Nation's clubs do not. In fact, some of my favorite clubs to work are the Live Nation clubs, but it comes down to the host has a lot more work to do. But if the host bombs, the feature's job is to bring the night back up, and the host sometimes will bomb just because you're on stage while people are ordering drinks, they're getting settled. I've had, when I was hosting more often, I had someone come up to me at one club and ask how we determine whose turn it is. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, it's just, you guys just take turns from whoever works here, just hosting the shows, right? Like, he thought I worked in the bar, or I was a waiter or a cook or something, and it was just my turn to host the show. I'm like, this is Emo Phillips who's headlining. Do you really think they just like drag someone? It's like, well, as soon as you're done cleaning that toilet, get on stage and host the show. But there's that perception. And so sometimes the host struggles through no fault of their own. They can have great material. And I had that moment plenty of times of like, I just cannot get them because they don't respect me. Whereas the show has officially begun. But that means you also, if the host didn't get much, that means you're coming in kind of cold. Yeah. And you got to warm it up for the headliner. And it's a fun spot. I enjoy it quite a bit. It's just, but you get there through just consistently showing up over and over and over again and looking at your jokes very critically. I know quite a few comics who make it to hosting consistently, and especially if they host at like bigger clubs, they will just kind of stick there. And then eventually they start to find themselves featuring at B clubs or C clubs, or even headlining at C clubs, but the act never really evolves that much. And some of the best bookers I've known at some of the bigger clubs, they can see that some people are headlining at whatever club in rural Dakota or South Dakota or something, but they're like, but they're a host here. Right. And that's just, I know I can think of, I was going to give an anecdote, but I immediately realized that I would be easy to Google who I was talking about. So I'm not going to. Because they're a very lovely person, but it was a booker. When a booker friend gave me an anecdote about something like that, and it all comes down to just try to be a professional. It's still a business, and it comes down to do the work when it comes to the material. Don't focus so much on the production value. Just if you have a 4K camera, it's only going to get your mediocre set in sparkling quality if the material's not good.
I want to back up a little bit, because you mentioned early on that you recognized that you were just a ball of energy up there because you were nervous and all that. And it's one thing to recognize it. Did you take any steps to actually be so mindful when you're up there that you you were able to tone that down? And if so, how did you do that?
Yeah. So I started to have just like simple little things that I like, little steps in the act or during my sets that I would try to remind myself to do consistently. Big one was whenever I had a joke that I believed was the punchline, whether it hit or not, especially early on, when the laugh was happening, take a break, take a beat, and take a breath.
Yeah.
And I would keep repeating to myself, slow down. And I put a lot of effort into enunciating more clearly. And just kind of making sure that I was realizing two things when I was watching those videos of me just being frantic. One was I was working myself up into a lather, and I was coming off stage just drenched in sweat, which is just disgusting. Like I can remember coming off stage from a 10-minute set in a room that was not warm, just drenched in my shirt, soaked through. It was disgusting. But I also, watching it, realized that there were good punchlines in the act. They just couldn't understand them because I was going so fast. And another comic, when I mentioned that what I was trying to do, he said, well, you're kind of like the boxer that comes out in the first round, just swinging wildly, trying to knock them down and get them. Like you're just swinging so wildly that nothing lands. And I started to slow down. And as a result of that, I started to have better sets. Suddenly the jokes are hitting harder. Some of the setups and the tags are hitting better because I'm not so frantic about it. It's a little more paced. Another thing that was a big step for me was I created a show called I Think I'd Be Good at That, when the whole point of the show was we would have 5 comics who were fairly established or consistently working, and they would help to write jokes and coach a person who had never done stand-up before to get on stage, and that person would then headline the show. And the show did very well. It was based in the Bay Area. We were doing some festivals. At the time of COVID, I think we had about a year's worth of stuff around the country booked. It's still on hiatus, but what ended up happening because of that is I got way more analytical about material, being able to write material in a more general way that as a comic, you start to get into your rhythms, like I know how I can zhuzh this up and make it work for me and my voice with a little shimmy shake and add a little lilt to it, and it works for me. But I need to make it work for other people. But it also part of that was coaching these new people into how to do stand up, and you kind of break it down into a basic process. And again, I was repeating to them, slow down at every punchline, take a deep breath, and then go into the next joke. Like don't just race through. And the great thing about all of that is I had people who they were terrified of public speaking. They were terrified of doing stand-up. And I had a lot of those folks come away from that experience saying that it not only changed their perception of stand-up comedy and performing, but it just changed their whole lives in terms of like presenting at work, giving a presentation, talking to people in public spaces. And you start to see those things, that how it becomes a universal thing. But you just have to concentrate on the moment and be more thoughtful about how these words are coming out of your mouth. And am I just beating them over the head, or am I doing it in a more conversational way? One other funny thing that happened as part of all of that process of like watching the video and trying to be super tight about the words, I started to realize that at one point I was getting so precise with the verbiage. It was like I was reading from a script, and I wasn't. It was just in my head. And I started to realize that I went from having really good sets to suddenly it was getting a little more mediocre, a little more flat. And I tried to keep the pace of not going too fast, but I would start to add in ums and uhs, and I started to think of it more like jazz, where I was able to kind of move around a little bit, where I know the beats, but I'm kind of changing the notes here and there, and that little extra bit of sloppiness, or perceived sloppiness. My wife will complain that it seems like I'm making the same uhs and ums and stutters over and over again. But to me, it ends up finding shape in like it hits with the audience in that they think this is just it's kind of a fun performance of it's coming out of my mouth for the first time, as opposed to I am reading a script, I am Jokebot 9000, here are my jokes. and that was another thing that evolved for me, and that's literally just watching and listening to my sets over and over and over again, which is super painful, but so necessary in this whole process.
I really like the idea of these themed showcases that are, either I think I can do that, or you go up and part of your set has to be a subject that you don't know until you walk up there and stuff like that. Because it really, first of all, it makes you mindful, but it's almost improv-y in the fact that you have to kind of watch what other people do and what's working for them. And I think that's really good for the growth of a comedian. And I'm scared to death to do it because I've got one here, and I'm like, I think if you throw a subject at me that I'm not ready for, I don't know what I can do. I'm just going to be up there stammering.
It's, and for my show, we would sit down with a person who had never done stand-up, and we would start asking them questions like, what's a story that you tell all the time at parties? What's a story that your friends would tell about you? And we start going through those. And so then the comics would start to, take their own stab at trying to write that. And then we would kind of rewrite it based on how this person, their cadence and all of that good stuff. And some comics would jump in head first and they really enjoyed the exercise. Other comics struggled with it. And I will say, if there's anyone out here who's considering creating a show where you give comedians homework, it's a terrible idea. Do not ever do it, because what I ended up having to do with most of those shows is we were aiming to have the person do about 10 minutes. And I would end up getting about 3 or 4 minutes worth of usable jokes from the comics and on most of those shows. So I ended up having to write most of the set, which was good and bad. On one hand, it really is lame that you have to sit down and try to write 6 or 7 minutes worth of jokes for a person and the show's happening in like a week, and like this has to be good on the first try. On the other hand, I did get good at it, and it affected my ability to write for myself. Like I had said earlier in the show, I'd gotten sloppy. I'd gotten used to a lot of stage time, and so I would just write on stage or I would edit on stage. And there's a period where I never wrote anything in a notebook or wrote it down anywhere. It was just in my head, and I would know like the title of a joke, and I would just kind of use that over and over again, but it would just kind of modify. Going through that exercise and writing a little more thoughtfully ended up meaning that in writing for other people and for another person and having to coach them into here's how you tell this joke, it made me a lot more analytical about the process of performing stand-up and writing stand-up, and that was continues to be a huge asset for me. Stage time is not as prevalent as it once was for me here by design. I didn't come to Detroit to get super famous, but and be on stage every night. But when I do go out 2 or 3 nights a week, I'm much more purpose-driven about what I'm doing on stage, and the joke is a lot more fleshed out than it used to be. It's not as I like to say the joke is now wearing jeans as opposed to the sweatpants it was a few years ago.
And when you get to a certain age, you just realize that you've got so much time left, and you don't want to waste that time at a show or a mic or something like that, doing something that doesn't give you anything back. And that I got stuck in that, and every time I did when I was in South Bend, the open mic would either have all comics there, or it would be just full Notre Dame students because they all decided to come. And every time it was full, standing room only, I would break out the greatest hits every single time instead of bringing out new stuff. And I kick myself now for that because it's just an open mic. It's not, they're not going to remember. I could have grown a lot quicker because it was full of Notre Dame students more often than not. And I could have grown a lot quicker if I just would have, sandwiched in some new stuff and not just bring out the greatest hits every time. But it's a learning process. And looking back, you can see all the things you did wrong. But you also have to be able to look forward too. So I haven't gotten into this yet. Why did you even start doing stand-up?
So I grew up in a family. I like to say we were carny folk. My father was in bands. My entire life still is in a band. And of course, then I got dragged into playing drums and bass at some point in a band with him. And I was in theater in high school, and I always enjoyed performing. And I'd always been kind of intrigued by stand-up. There's at some point we were at some family thing and I was like 12 or something. It was karaoke. And I went up and I told him that I just wanted to tell jokes. And I tried to tell jokes in like a bar setting with a bunch of adults early some Saturday night. Anyway, just from an early age, I was kind of intrigued by it. And I'd always really enjoyed stand-up. And then it was Dave Attell's Insomniac show on Comedy Central was the first time where I was like, that looks like fun. Like it's like you just get to travel around, and at the time drinking was something that attracted me. And you get to travel around the country and the world and have fun. And then Mr. Show was like the moment for me of like, I enjoyed Kids in the Hall. I'd always watched SNL, but Mr. Show was the first time where I was like, oh, I can see the wheels turning behind the purpose of these jokes. That was big. And then the Comedians of Comedy, when that hit, of Patton Oswalt and Brian Posehn and Galifianakis and Maria Bamford were all like, they're all unique comics, but they were just super funny. And to see like touring around and just doing it at bars and small theaters and stuff like that. And that was finally the moment. And what happened for me was I graduated from college with the intent to work in journalism, which I still am angry that my college took my money to get that degree. But but I started working in radio, and I was working at one radio company. I had gotten a promotion, and then almost immediately they laid off everyone at that particular office. And I managed to get a decent severance out of it because I had just been, we just signed papers, gotten a contract, all that good stuff. And so I just managed to get a good severance out of it. I've been talking about stand-up forever. And my then fiance, now wife, to this day, she still regrets it. But she said, we got a little money. You've got some time. Why don't you go just try the stand-up thing? Just go try it and just see how it is. And I think she had the expectation that, like a lot of things and a lot of people, I would go do it once or twice, kind of get the taste out of my mouth, and then go back to normal life. And I signed up for my first club open mic, did that. I was the best open micer by far, which is not saying a lot, but I had a pretty solid set, and walked out of that night just like, oh, I'm doing this for a while. And it's just been that ever since.
That's cool. That's kind of my story. My wife kind of helped push me into doing it too. And it's the bad part was I drug her to all the open mics when I first started. And, I'd ask her one question, was I the worst? And as long as I wasn't the worst, I'd keep going. And sometimes I was close.
My wife went to a lot of them early on, and then she went to, when I started to get work at clubs, she would come to some of that. And then at some point she hit that wall that a lot of wives do, understandably. And she was like, I'll go to the big ones at the places I like that have the food and drinks that I like. That's the one I'll go to. And I respect her for it. She has, and there's been moments where like I was hanging out at the Punchline on a New Year's Eve, and Doug Benson showed up. I'm not a big fan. I'm not a big pot smoker. My wife does tend to enjoy it, but then Doug Benson is standing there, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to smoke a joint?" I'm like, "Well, of course I'm going to smoke a joint with Doug Benson." And then later when I get home very, very high, my wife's like, what happened to you? I'm like, I got high with Doug Benson. Of course I did. And she's like, no. So she's missed out on a few things like that. But for the most part, she's always been super supportive. But, spouses, it's very silly. And sometimes when you're traveling or flying around and you end up making grand total, $20 or $30 from a night of doing stand up, there's moments when my wife is like, where is this going? But and again, understandably so. But I'm at this place here in Detroit where I'm like, I'm as busy as I want to be. I've got club stuff that's like once a month or so. I'm doing a club week. I do a couple of shows a week, no matter what. I was doing some road stuff. Gas prices have kind of made it so it's not necessarily ideal, but I just kind of fit it in where I can. But I'm as busy as I want to be, but I'm not in that same grind that I felt like I was, where it was like, it's every 3 months I got to go down to LA and try and do a few nights of sets, and I gotta go do some sets in Portland, and I gotta go to the Punchline every Sunday night for the Sunday showcase. And like, yeah, I know I just got up, but it's like, I gotta go hang out so people see that I'm there.
Yeah.
I'm going more for the reclusive genius thing now.
Yeah.
And that's been good. And I do have to say, I was seeing all the people getting all the messages from folks when I got into the Asheville Comedy Festival. Was super nice, and it just feeds into my reclusive genius thing. So thanks to everyone who reached out, and thanks to Asheville for accepting me. I appreciate it.
That's great. Now, if you hypothetical, if you are working a club and you see this newer comic that you can tell has potential, and you it's pretty easy to see potential these days, and you know they have potential, and you think that they've got what it takes, and you can tell they carry themselves like somebody who would be a good comedian. What would you recommend that they do in their first year to get them to where they want to be quicker?
So first thing I would recommend is find the closest club and start hanging out there as often as possible. Do not be in the way. Learn people's names and stay out of the way, but just be there and figure out what their process is, and make that your goal, to be getting on stage consistently and to be past and working that club. The other thing I would recommend is start your own show. Find a decent venue with good conditions. I'm not saying, I see a lot of comics that start shows that are just an awful bar spot. The layout is not correct. It's an awful setup for a comedy show, but they'll just do it just because they're just so desperate to have a show. Make sure the logistics are right. And as a new comic, you're going to figure out what's right and wrong as you do those shows. And also, if it's not right, be okay with letting stuff go and finding another venue. Don't just hold on to it's either. In every town there's some really crappy show that everyone says that show sucks, but yeah, it's every Tuesday if you want to do a set. Don't be that show. So create a better show. But while all of that's happening, your number one goal shouldn't necessarily be to just be getting past and trying to get work. The big thing in that first year is that get on stage as much as possible. Record your sets. I would say with the first year, audio. Just focus on audio. Record it with your phone, and then listen back to every single set, and consume as much comedy as you can. Don't be the person who stands outside smoking a cigarette, or if the comedy's happening in another room, you're in the other room. You're at the bar getting drunk. Watch the other comics as much as possible, because you do start to learn what to do and what not to do. And you'll see the comics who are getting work in the area. You'll see what they're doing. And then you'll see the guys who, like, they've been doing it 10 years, but they've been an open micer that whole time. And you can start to figure out, like, oh, that's why that person doesn't get any work. So watch that stuff. But also, you got Netflix, YouTube, you got all these other spots to consume as much comedy as possible. And then compare yourself. Think of it as competitive, but always competitive with yourself. Don't start battles with other comics. Don't judge other comics. It's always about you. You can point out what other, especially in the local scene, you can point out what other people are doing wrong all the time. It doesn't make any difference in regards to what you're doing. And I can speak from experience and conversations I've had with bookers at clubs. They don't necessarily think of it as one comic versus the other. They're trying to find the right pieces to fit in whatever show they're booking. So it's a rich pastiche of different colors and options. So you might be a guy who's might be a chubby white guy with a beard who talks about Spider-Man. There's another chubby white guy with a beard, but he's talking. It's all about craft beer and his wife. It's two different things, and a booker is going to look at those analytically as different pieces of a puzzle to put together on the show. So don't think of it necessarily as competitive against other comics. Just always try to push yourself, and not don't start shit with other comics. It's just and if at all possible, don't date other comics. I've seen that implode enough times. Do whatever you can to just squash that early. I've
seen some of that too, and it's I'm just glad I didn't start when I was so young and stupid, because I know I would have made all those mistakes and probably worse than anybody else.
Oh yeah, and I can say that, and I was married when I started to get in, or I was engaged when I got into comedy. So my wife's been with me through the whole thing. So I've never been that person, but I've watched it happen with so many of my friends, and I do know a couple of successful comedy relationships with people who are who have done managed to make it work. But that's definitely the minority.
Yeah. It's an anomaly. Well, Drew, thank you so much for being on the show. Where can folks find you on the internet, and where are you going to be here in the next few weeks?
Yeah, depending on when this airs, check out drewharmon.com,
Okay.
just DREWHARMON. That has all my latest show information, all of that good stuff. I've got some local shows around Detroit and Michigan here for the next month or so. And then in August, I'll be in Asheville, North Carolina. A month after that, I'll be in...
You're finally at that hot new spot, the one your friends keep raving about, sitting across from your date. It's going...
Another round?
Really well. And that dish you've been dying to try, oh, it's headed your way. You can smell it, hear it sizzling fresh off that skillet as it comes closer, and served. Go ahead, enjoy. After your phone sneaks a bite first. When you're with Amex, it's not if it's going to happen, but when. American Express. Don't live life without it.
Help your 4-year-old find joy in learning. Waterford Upstart is a proven effective pre-K learning program that includes fun songs, games, and activities that prepare your child for success in school. We provide all the tools you need to help your child learn to read, including a coach, a computer, and internet access. And because it's already paid for, it's free for you. Enroll today at waterfordupstart.org.
San Francisco. And off the top of my head, I think in July I'm going to be in Chicago for a couple of days. I'll make sure that it'll all be on my website, drewharmon.com, and you can also find me on Twitter. That is at Drew Harmon, just my name, nothing crazy, just at Drew Harmon. So check all that stuff out, and I will be in a town near you hopefully soon. Great.
Well, I did really enjoy that set, and folks, I'm going to put that set in the show notes so you can take a look at it. And I think it's a good 101 on how to put a set together to get in the clubs and festivals and stuff like that. So I think you did a really good job with it.
Thank you. And also, I think I titled that one Short Set. If you title a set Short Set on YouTube, I know bookers and people who review sets like that, just because it's further little evidence of like, okay, this is short, because it's bookers, especially for like festivals and competitions and stuff. They watch so many clips, and I've heard plenty of bookers say that they'll watch the first 90 seconds and then they fast forward to the last minute. Yeah. And that's all they need most of the time. If you title it Short Set, people are more likely to, the time's there on YouTube, but
right.
They just like that reassurance.
That's cool.
It's like, okay, this is short.
That's funny, because I made a note of that when I was watching it. I thought, yeah, that's a pretty cool name, Short Set. If I was a booker, that's what I'd want to see. So that's cool. Yeah, great. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. I feel like I interrogated you a little bit here today, but I had specific things I wanted to know, and you gave me all the answers, so I appreciate that.
Thank you for having me on. It didn't feel like an interrogation at all. This was a great chance to chat. I hope people got something out of it, even if I am understandably not that big of a deal. But I hope folks got out of it. I wish everyone the best of luck. We're all going to make it, guys. We're all going to make it.
Thanks so much, Drew.
Thank you, Scott.